What up? What up? What up? Welcome back to Lockdown Universe, home of the bizarre, peculiar, and unheard of stories of UFO legend and paranormal lore. Welcome back, welcome back. Happy to be back. Hopefully you guys are doing awesome and taking care of yourselves. We're off. We're running, baby. Here we go. We're on a mission, and we're going to get it. Project Weld is what we're talking about. What the hell is Project Weld? You never heard of it before, have you? It's because it's brand new information coming out. Okay? So this story comes to us from none other than Richard Doty, one of the biggest whistleblowers of all time, coming out of the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, and he's telling us everything we want to know. And this story is fucking fantastic. So let's get into it. So what is he talking about? So Project Weld is a government program that's going to tell us about the future. What's happening in the future? What will happen in the future? And what should we expect? So that's what Project Weld is. Now they're using psychics. They've used a screening process from the previous episode that we talked about a Professor X, a real Professor X that they were utilizing. And they're locating hybrids. They're locating psychics. And they want to find out in incremental terms what the world is going to look like for the United States, for Russia, for China, so that we can prepare. And also for any alien threat. So that's what they are working on with Project Weld. So they started to go through their military personnel to see who qualified in this program. They started to utilize a screening process that for folks that had the ability to see the future. So Weld was owned by the Defense Intelligence Agency, the DIA. DIA's got its hands in everything, doesn't it? So they came to find out that not only were the adults who were in the military capable of these psychic capabilities, but they also came to find out that younger individuals, all the way down to 14 years old, were quite capable of doing the exact same thing as their elder counterparts. So why would they want to take a younger person and bring them in? Well, because younger people have tons of capability to progress and become better. They have tons of capability and endurance. They have the capability for them to keep them for longer. So it's just a win-win-win all the way around. So their screening was as good or maybe even better than the individuals that they had. These children were better than the people they actually had. They were clairvoyant. They had unique astral projection capabilities. They had other unique capabilities that when they brought them in, they were able to train them quickly. And of course, they had to be under the direct supervision of their parents. But that's what they were looking for. So Doty states that there were several very special individuals who were brought in on this team and changed the outlook of the U.S. government into who they were bringing in. See, they thought they were bringing in just humans. But what they came to find out was something much, much more drastic. We'll get into it. Okay? So let's get into it. So they were trying to figure out where all these individuals, what's the common denominator? Where did all these individuals come from? Were they born at a certain time? Were they drinking a certain water? What was the common denominator? They didn't have the ability to determine that yet. But what they came to find out was much different. They came to find out that there was, they were masking themselves. These hybrids, they were able to continue to mask themselves. So when they were able to mask themselves, this became a big problem because now you had these hybrids working for this program that was supposed to be for humans, and now all of a sudden you have a whole bunch of hybrids working underneath your program. Hybrids, you say? How could the hybrids have infiltrated the government? We got to remember, This program came in early, early in the 70s, early 80s, late 70s, early 80s. They didn't have the technology to figure out blood testing or brain mapping. MRIs weren't out yet. CAT scans weren't out yet. They weren't able to take the physiology that they knew about aliens and test for it yet. Not yet, but it started to happen. Okay, let's get into that. Okay. So Doty continues to talk about how they started to use medical doctors and they brought them in and they started to basically try to develop some sort of screening technique for people who they think might be some hybrid or something other than an alien. Now, we don't even know which aliens that we're talking about here. We're talking about multiple species that can be psychic, that could easily mask themselves and come on in. The interesting thing was that when they started being able to test this, when they started being able to try to figure out who was a hybrid and who was not, some of the individuals knew they were hybrids. Some did not. Now that's really interesting. So what they did was they started to create this screening where they would sit these individuals down and sit them down one-on-one. More than that was too much of a distraction. And there's a lot of things that you can detect on a one-on-one meeting or interview than you can in a room of 20 or 30 people. You can conduct these one-on-one interviews. And during the times of these interviews, what they would ask them is some very specific information. And when you ask them questions about regular everyday life, they could answer them easily. They could answer questions about themselves easily. But when it came down to how they react to certain questions, that's when we knew that they were not human, or at least they were not fully human. They would start to ask them questions about their family's history and where their family came from, and history about the earth in general. These individuals were unable to respond in a cohesive or understandable answer. When asked about their family, ancestry, they just couldn't pull anything up. Like, they can't lie. So they basically just didn't have an answer. They didn't have an answer of, I don't know. They didn't have an answer of, I do know. They just had nothing. So you had this very cohesive individual right in front of you that's able to predict the future, able to predict and be telepathic and be sometimes even telekinetic, but they couldn't tell you anything about their family history. They can't lie. They don't have the deception qualities that we do. Are we better than they are? No, not necessarily. I don't know if the ability to lie is necessarily a better thing, but they came to a realization at this point that they're basically allowing these hybrids into a government program for possibly up to 20 to 30 to 40 years in the past, because these people had been on the planet for that long, bare minimum, that we didn't know about. And they were allowing these people to get hired into these agencies. So they started to develop these procedures in order to test. They started to develop blood tests. They started to develop the nuclear imaging tests, where you can inject a dye and then see where that dye goes in the body. What these hybrids were able to do was to take that dye and disseminate it into like these elimination sacs, so the dye would basically disappear before it could get throughout the entire body. As you may know, if you ever had a CAT scan or an MRI, they inject you for certain CAT scans and MRIs with a dye. And that dye is nuclear, and that dye goes through your body, and they're able to see the images better. But when they were doing this to the hybrids, they were eliminating it before it could even get through their circulatory system. It was fascinating. It's fascinating. So I was really surprised, because you would think that that wouldn't be the case. You would think that they would try to blend in as much as possible, but they were finding out that their physiology was much different too. So they would, once they knew that there was some physiology they could see, then they did a deeper dive. Then they were able to actually do CAT scans later on. And what they were able to see once they were able to do the organ scans for the upper torso was to see, okay, they have a liver, okay, they have kidneys, they have this and that. But wait a minute, there's an organ, there's a huge organ here. We don't even know what that thing does. How does that? What is that? And it was common amongst many of the hybrids, not all, because remember, there's multiple different alien species that have been able to finagle their way into the government or into the military-industrial complex. So it's not just one species, not just some grays, not just some reptilians, not just some Pleiadians, but there's a lot. And basically, they're all able to do similar things. But what they found out was that there's a certain gray race, the taller gray race, not the small ones, but the taller gray race, that was able to utilize the human DNA to make their hybrids, to allow them to live and continue their exploration in the universe, and then to continue to infiltrate the U.S. government. So if you think that one of our politicians is an alien, you might be right. You might be right on the freaking money. So Doty talks about these ebens, which are not the grays. They are kind of like a bluish bulbous head type alien, and that's something that the aliens that we found in Roswell and in Aztec, New Mexico, those guys were ebens. They weren't the grays, they were the ebens. So they went to go work for a particular bureau and directorate of the government, the ones that lived anyway, and continued to help develop this for the DIA because of this reason. They're trying to seek out contactees and experiencers and investigate what they're telling us. They're trying to investigate who's who and what's what, right? So there are agents that were trained in a particular division of the DIA, and they were trained in asking the right questions, okay? And being able to interrogate or interview these contactees or experiencers so that, right? So that we can have those individuals tell their story and that we could bring forth the truth. The next step was being able to track these individuals down. So they developed part of this Weld project, Weld, okay, owned by the DIA or run by the DIA, is to track these individuals. So once they knew who was a hybrid, then they started to track them. Why? Because they want to know where they're going, and if they are part of the U.S. government now, we want to know if they're jumping off world with information. The other thing that they wanted to do was to put these guys into a special building, into a special project. So they didn't let on that they knew that these guys were hybrids. What they did was they took blood samples, 2 blood vials, and once they found out who was who and what was what, they took the hybrids and said, hey guys, we have a special project for your group. Your group's going to be in building A, and we need you guys to be there. We need you guys to be there doing your project for a certain amount of period of time. But what they didn't tell them was that they were basically in a detention center. And when they were in this detention center, they were running programs, of course, and they were, being fed, and they were being treated like they were normal people, but they were actually in a detention center. And there was actually some hybrids that escaped. There was a family of 3, a father, a mother, and a son that escaped. And they had to track them down, according to Richard Doty. You know why? Because Richard Doty was the one that tracks people down. That was his job. He said, the operation was basically to track them, find them, interrogate them, and then find out more information. And then once they were done, they actually took these individuals and put them in a different program that was not even in the DIA. So you have a lot of these alphabet soup agencies that help each other out. Once the DIA is done with one group, they might throw them over to the NSA. They might throw them over to the CIA. They might throw them over to, FBI. Doubtful. FBI is like low level, right? But they're basically like national police. So they're not part of extraterrestrial stuff, despite what you think, Mulder and Scully might have said. And even though they were in the FBI, they should have been in like the AFOSI or something like that, Office special investigations for the Air Force. That would have been a little bit more believable. But the people haven't heard of the AFOSI, so I get it. But it would have been cooler if they were like, DIA. But I think the reason they did that in the X-Files was just to give you like a starting point. They're in the FBI, but they're kept in the basement. Nobody really believes them. And as they do more and more research, they find out more and more about the DIA and more about everybody else. So it kind of blended in. But again, going back to Project Arkweld, basically, he said some of these guys would disappear. Some of these alien hybrids would just disappear, and they had to track them down. Now, how did they track them down? Doty's not going to say. That's one of the things that they're keeping as part of their national security project. They're not going to say how they tracked these guys down, but he did say that they were in a detention center that was in Washington, D.C. You got to love it, right? D.C., man, right in the heart of the capital. Yikes. FBI agents were called in. Intelligence officers were called in to track these three people down, three people from the same family, right? And he said he didn't even know how they escaped. He said, I'm not sure. I have no idea how they escaped. But they did escape, and that's the problem. And he said they knew where they were going because they could track them, and they were going to a residence in Virginia, Vienna, Virginia. He didn't have, the details of why they were going there, but he knew they were going there. So part of Project Arkweld is to find these guys and, find human hybrids, and then also to keep them under one roof. So what's interesting is when they were doing these tests, they're asking people, hey, what's the future hold? Are we winning? Are we not winning? Who's going to be on top? Is it America or is it Russia? Is it going to be, is America even going to be here in the next 20 years? Well, what they found out was the more extraterrestrial DNA they had, the deeper they could get into their psychic capabilities and find out more information. Okay, so he said the more DNA they have, the more extraterrestrial DNA they have, the more material they have within them, the more aware they are of who they are, the fact that they are extraterrestrials. He said, he's not a medical person. Doty's not medical. He's like a tracker. But he said that they had to use defensive techniques in order to mask themselves if they knew that they were indeed hybrids. They would use physical capabilities, physical hiding of their face. Transmogrification is what I like to call it, is what they call it. That they might, if they allowed other individuals to see who they were, they might be taken off into a different program. So, what if they were to tell somebody that they were a hybrid? What do you think would happen? They were worried they were going to be dissected. They're not going to tell everybody that. Doesn't make any sense. So, again, moving back into the project, he stated that, the whole idea of this project is to make sure that we know what the future is, what the future holds, using individuals that were in the military to tell us the future, to tell us what the threats were or where we were going to stand. And then through this Project Arkweld, kind of in summation here, they found out that there was 25 to 30% of hybrids working for the government. So when you're talking about 100% of the employees working for the government, they found out that there was 25 to 30% of them that were hybrids. What? So apparently this started with a woman named Katie Schmidt, and she stated that she knew she was being visited by aliens, and she believed that she was a hybrid, and she worked for a military alphabet soup agency. And so they took her seriously. They helped her. They did not fire her. They took her in, and they started to work with her. And this was the beginning of everything. She stated that you can tell the difference if you take some of the vitreous fluid from the eyes, that it's different for hybrids versus humans. Some of the other DNA types you can tell is different as well. Some individuals do have scalier skin that's being hidden by their inherent transmogrifying capabilities. He said basically every single intelligence officer after 1983 had to have blood tests to make sure that they did not have alien DNA in them, especially in the individuals who were going in overseas or in any other top secret mission. So they did blood tests. But that's in 1983. Think about the testing that they have now. Have you seen that movie? Was it Fifth Wave, where they have these goggles that can like basically see if a person is one of these aliens, just like They Live, right? Those goggles where Roddy Piper put those on, and you could tell if they were bone aliens or not. They had like the skeletons or whatever. That was beautiful, a great movie, and I'm sure all these movies that come up with this shit. I mean, it's life imitates art and art imitates life. I'm sure we don't do blood tests on these people anymore. We're just using some sort of high-tech equipment to just see if they are. You know, they have technology where you can just put your hand on the detector. The detector can see right through your hand, and it can see your veins, and it can see whether or not it's the same vein pattern that you had yesterday. And if it's not the same vein pattern, you're not getting in. You can't mimic somebody's vein pattern, okay? Unless you have their actual hand. And I'm sure the tester can tell if it's alive, so you can't just chop it off. But the old school ways, you could like take somebody's fingertips and be like, just put it up to the top, and then you could probably get in, and not like all these other movies, right? And hell, in Minority Report, Tom Cruise took his old eyes and scanned them in and was able to get in to his previous police force building. So at this point, even Doty states, I don't know who we're dealing with anymore. He says the DIA is definitely still running this program. The NSA is involved. The Office of Special Investigations is involved. Office of Naval Intelligence. Even the Coast Guard is even involved. So there's many people who are involved, many people who are in on this, and this is still an ongoing project. Just like we were talking about with the last podcast where we discussed no more remote viewing. It's all that new terminology, just like the UAPs. They're utilizing that, and they're utilizing new technology to figure out who's an alien, who's not, and who's a psychic and who's not. This stuff is real, guys, and you could be, who knows, maybe you could be an alien, alien hybrid, or maybe many of us are. But he states not everyone is. So that's something to think about. And so Emery asks him, he says, hey, many people out in the audience want to know, how would I know if my significant other is an alien or is a hybrid? And he said, well, I can't really, obviously we don't have I can't give you technology to do that. But what you can do is you can go to a clairvoyant. The clairvoyant can look in and kind of give you some ideas to whether or not you might be a hybrid. And then you can kind of go in a little bit deeper and try to find out maybe which species you might be part of. There's a lot of people that believe they know which species they already are, and that's really fascinating too. Imagine just, finding out from a clairvoyant or a psychic that you just happen to have, partial reptilian blood in you, or partial, Pleiadian blood or gray blood in you. I often wonder that, and I often wonder if, sometimes, if people who are really aggressive, prone to aggression, prone to violence, might not have more reptilian blood in them. People that are more peaceful, people that are more loving might have, a different species, whatever species that might be. The Cassiopeians, according to Radney Kramer, are really peaceful and loving and telepathic. I think my ex had some reptilian in her, man. I swear to God, I saw her face change every time she got mad. She got mad a lot. So, I think she might have been a reptilian, or at least had some reptilian in her, man. And she was partially psychic too, man. It was terrifying to be with, terrifying. But I'm with an angel now, so that's all that matters. I think she might be partially alien too, but on the good side. So, what do you think you are? Do you think you might pass one of these government tests to become a psychic? There's a lot of people out there that claim to be, or that can be, or that can be trained to be. Wouldn't it be interesting if we all started training ourselves to become more psychic so that we can all become more gentle with each other, more loving, more compassionate, so that we can become more compassionate with ourselves? Wouldn't that be nice? oftentimes I find myself so stressed out, but if I could give myself the peace and the freedom and the loving kindness and empathy, forgiveness, that's the word I'm looking for, forgiveness, then I might feel better. I have lower blood pressure. I'd be able to live longer, you know? So, anyway, guys, think about how you're living your life. Think about how you're taking care of yourselves. Meditate, pray. These things are real. Take care of your family. Pray for them. Meditate for them. Whatever you want to do, think good thoughts for them. And take care of yourself. Physically, spiritually, emotionally. Follow through on your hobbies and your goals and your dreams. And as always, continue to question the universe around you, baby. Until next time, Lockdown Universe out. All credits to KMFDM for the music. Lockdown Universe out. Peace.